In the early 1900s, the White Star Line built the three largest moving objects mankind had ever created. Three sister ships, nearly identical, built side by side in the same Belfast shipyard, each one almost 900 feet long and weighing around 50,000 tons. They were advertised as the safest vessels ever put to sea. One of them was rammed by a warship. The other two sank, and one woman, the same woman, was working aboard all three when it happened. Her name was Violet Jessop. She was a stewardess and later a nurse. In 1911, the Olympic failed underneath her. In 1912, the Titanic went down underneath her. In 1916, the Britannic sank underneath her in less than an hour. Three sister ships, three disasters, three survivals. The crews who sailed with her gave her a nickname that followed her for the rest of her life: Miss Unsinkable. And before you decide, this is a sailor's legend. Every voyage, every sinking, and every survival is documented in shipping records, crew lists, and her own memoirs. This story is real, and it begins with a girl who, by all medical logic, should never have made it to sea at all. Let's talk about Violet Jessop for a second, because surviving was her talent long before she ever saw a ship. She was born in 1887 in Argentina, the eldest daughter of Irish immigrants. As a child, she caught tuberculosis. The doctors gave her months to live. She recovered, the first impossible survival on a list that was only getting started. When her father died, the family moved to Britain, and Violet, at 21, went to work at sea to support her mother and siblings. A stewardess in those years was something between a maid, a waitress, and a nurse. Endless hours, tiny cabins, low pay. But here's what almost nobody knows about her early career. Young, pretty stewardesses were considered a problem at sea. Shipping lines preferred middle-aged women. Violet reportedly wore frumpy clothes and no makeup to her interviews, deliberately making herself plain just to get hired. She disguised herself to win a job on the very ships that would keep trying to kill her. By 1910, she was working for the White Star Line, and in 1911, they assigned her to the pride of the fleet, the brand new RMS Olympic. The Olympic was the first of the three sisters, and for a brief moment, the largest ship in the world. On September 20th, 1911, she was leaving port near Southampton with Violet aboard, when a Royal Navy cruiser called HMS Hawke came alongside. Two enormous steel hulls, moving through a narrow channel, generating suction neither captain fully understood. The Hawke was pulled into the Olympic side. Her armored bow, designed to ram enemy ships, tore a gash in the liner's hull, ripping open two watertight compartments below the waterline. The safest ship in the world was holed on a calm day, in sight of land, by a friendly vessel. But the design held. The Olympic limped back to port without a single death. For most of the crew, it was a frightening story with a happy ending. For Violet Jessop, it was strike one. And when White Star offered her a transfer to the Olympic's newer, grander sister, she didn't want to go. This is the detail that makes her story feel like fate. Violet Jessop almost refused the Titanic. She was content where she was. Friends had to talk her into it, telling her the new ship would be a wonderful experience. She signed on. On the night of April 14th, 1912, for days into the maiden voyage, Violet was dozing in her bunk when the iceberg opened the starboard side. In her memoir, she described the strange calm of those first minutes. Passengers joking on the slanting deck, stewards reassuring everyone that the ship could not possibly sink because everyone aboard had been told exactly that. The air, she wrote, was bitterly cold and the night impossibly clear. She was ordered up to the boat deck, where she watched the now famous scene unfold. The confusion, the half-filled lifeboats, the orchestra playing in the freezing dark. And then she was given a role she never asked for. Many passengers below decks didn't speak English, and many didn't trust the tiny lifeboats hanging 70 feet above black water. So officers ordered crew members in first as examples. Violet was put into Lifeboat 16 to show the others it was safe. As the boat began to drop, someone thrust a bundle into her arms. A baby, a stranger's baby, handed to her at the last second by someone she never saw clearly. She spent the night holding that child in the open Atlantic, watching the largest ship in the world break apart and disappear. More than 1,500 people died in the water that night. At dawn, the survivors were pulled aboard a rescue ship, the Carpathia. And there, the baby's story took one more strange turn. A woman rushed at Violet, snatched the child from her arms without a single word, and vanished into the crowd. No name, no thank you, nothing. Violet survived the Titanic and never even learned whose child she had saved. 2 ships down. You would forgive her for never stepping on a boat again. Instead, when the First World War broke out, Violet Jessop volunteered to go back to sea as a Red Cross nurse. And the ship they assigned her to was the third and final sister, the Britannic, converted into a floating hospital, painted white with enormous red crosses. After Titanic, the Britannic had been redesigned. A double hull, taller watertight bulkheads, giant lifeboat cranes. She was supposed to be the unsinkable lessons of the Titanic, made real. On that November morning, she was steaming through a narrow channel near the Greek island of Kea, on her way to pick up wounded soldiers from the front. Her hospital wards were, mercifully, almost empty, just over 1,000 crew and medical staff aboard, and none of the 3,000 patients she was built to carry. On the morning of November 21st, 1916, in the Aegean Sea, she struck a naval mine. The explosion tore open her bow, and this time, the safest ship in the world sank in just 55 minutes, 3 times faster than the Titanic. Violet found herself in a lifeboat being lowered down the ship's side. And then she saw it. The Britannic's gigantic bronze propellers had risen out of the water, and they were still turning. The suction was dragging the lifeboats straight into the blades. The boat ahead of hers was pulled in and destroyed. So Violet jumped. She leapt out of the lifeboat into the open sea, was pulled under by the suction, and slammed her head against the ship's keel before fighting her way back to the surface. She came up, gasping, in the middle of the wreckage, alive. Again, 30 people died at the Britannic. More than 1,000 survived. And here's the detail that tells you everything about Violet Jessop. Years later, a doctor examining her for headaches found an old fracture in her skull. She had cracked her skull on the Britannic's keel, swum out, climbed into a lifeboat, and simply never mentioned it to anyone. She didn't even take time off. So what does a person do after surviving the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic? If you're Violet Jessop, you go back to work. On ships. She returned to the sea after the war and stayed there for the rest of her career. 42 years in total, crossing the world's oceans on liner after liner. She finally retired in 1950 to a small cottage in the English countryside, where she raised chickens and tended a garden on land that did not move and did not sink. And in retirement, she told one last story. One evening, her telephone rang. A woman's voice asked if she was the Violet Jessop who had saved a baby on the night the Titanic sank. Violet said yes. The voice said, "I was that baby," laughed, and hung up. No name, no number. She never heard from her again. Whether it was truly that child or someone's strange idea of a joke, no one will ever know. Even her epilogue refused to close cleanly. Violet Jessop died peacefully in 1971 at the age of 83, on dry land. And what about the 3 sisters? Their fates tell the story in miniature. The Titanic lies 2.5 miles down in the North Atlantic. The Britannic rests on her side off the Greek coast, the largest sunken liner in the world. And the Olympic, the one that was merely rammed, sailed on for 24 more years. She served as a troop ship in the war, rammed and sank a German U-boat in 1918, earned the nickname Old Reliable, and was finally retired and scrapped peacefully in 1935. Of the 3 sisters, the only one that survived was the one Violet was standing on when the trouble began. And here's the number that still doesn't feel real. Of the three largest, safest, most advanced ships of their generation, two never reached old age, and one stewardess outlived them all, working aboard each one on the exact voyage disaster chose. Statisticians can tell you the odds of surviving one shipwreck. There is no meaningful math for being aboard all three sisters and walking away every time. And that's the thing about luck that nobody ever really prepares you for. We can't decide if Violet Jessop was the unluckiest woman ever to go to sea or the luckiest. Disaster followed her onto three ships, and 3 times it couldn't keep her. The safest ships in the world kept sinking. Violet Jessop kept swimming. That's real. If this one amazed you, the like button genuinely helps the channel. And if you want more true stories that should be fiction but aren't, we post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next.